Most people approach self-improvement like a war. They believe that for a life to be transformed, it must be subjected to a violent, dramatic overhaul. They wait for January 1st to arrive so they can suddenly become a person who wakes up at 4 a.m., runs 10 miles, and works 12 hours straight on a new business. This is the grand overhaul trap. It is a byproduct of a culture that rewards the appearance of effort over the reality of results. We've been conditioned to believe that if we aren't suffering, we aren't growing. We look for the loud changes, the extreme diets, the grueling workout programs, the all-in business pivots. But intensity is the enemy of consistency. The harder you push against the grain of your own psychology, the harder your brain pushes back. This is why 92% of New Year's resolutions are dead by February. You aren't failing because you lack willpower. You're failing because you're relying on a finite resource to solve an infinite problem. Willpower is a battery that drains. Systems are a power grid that sustains. Real change doesn't happen in a shout. It happens in a whisper. It's the result of habits so small, they feel like they shouldn't work. This is the power of quiet transformation. When you improve by just 1% every day, you don't just get better, you compound. Mathematically, that 1% daily improvement makes you 37 times better by the end of the year. You don't need a grand overhaul. You need a series of micro wins that bridge the gap between where you are and who you want to become. The goal isn't to force yourself into a new life. The goal is to create a system where your desired lifestyle becomes the path of least resistance. We are moving from force to flow. In this newsletter, we're going to look at the invisible compounding framework. 10 habits that require near zero energy but produce 10 times results. These are the habits that move the needle while you aren't even looking. The intensity delusion. Why you're working too hard for too little. The modern world is obsessed with the peak. We see the billionaire's morning routine or the athlete's training camp, and we try to emulate the finished product without understanding the process. Most people are addicted to the feeling of being productive rather than the act of producing. They mistake motion for progress. They rely on motivation, a fair weather friend that disappears the moment you have a bad night's sleep, a stressful day at the office, or a minor setback in your personal life. Relying on motivation to change your life is like relying on a lightning strike to power your house. It's high voltage, but it's unpredictable and unsustainable. If your progress stops when your mood drops, you don't have a lifestyle, you have a hobby. Consider the person who buys a $2,000 treadmill, runs 5 miles on the first day, gets debilitatingly sore, and never touches the machine again. Contrast that with the person who commits to walking for just 10 minutes every morning. The first person is chasing intensity. The second person is building an identity. The identity gap. The reason most habits fail is that we try to change the outcome without changing the identity. If you view yourself as a lazy person trying to work out, every gym session is a battle against your true self. You are essentially lying to yourself every time you pick up a dumbbell. Eventually, the truth, your old identity, wins out. I spent years in this burn and crash cycle. I would have weeks of hyperproductivity where I felt like I was conquering the world, followed by months of total stagnation where I couldn't even bring myself to check my email. I was tired, anxious, and constantly checking my to-do list like it was a death warrant. I thought the solution was more discipline. I was wrong. The solution was less resistance. The aha moment came when I realized that the most successful people in the world aren't actually the most disciplined. They just have the best systems that require the least amount of discipline. They've lowered the bar for entry so far that it's actually harder to not do the work than it is to do it. The philosophy of minimum viable habits, MVH. MVH is about focusing on the floor, the absolute least you can do, rather than the ceiling, the most you can do on your best day, When you focus on the ceiling, you set yourself up for failure. On the days you only hit 50% of your goal, you feel like a failure. And that shame triggers a "what the hell" effect that leads to giving up entirely. When you focus on the floor, you ensure that you never go to zero. By lowering the floor, you remove the friction that causes procrastination. You stop viewing habits as chores and start viewing them as votes for your future self. This is how you bypass the amygdala, the part of the brain that views big changes as threats, and move straight into the prefrontal cortex, where logic and long-term planning live. The advantage of this perspective is psychological safety. When you know you only have to do 2 minutes of work, your brain doesn't trigger the stress response that leads to scrolling on social media for 3 hours. You gain the advantage of momentum. The invisible compounding protocol, 10 micro wins for massive change. The core problem of human achievement is that we overestimate what we can do in a day, but we vastly underestimate what we can do in a year of boring, quiet consistency. To win the game of life, you have to stop trying to win it all at once. You have to learn to play the long game by winning the small moments. Here is the 10-step protocol to rewire your life without breaking your spirit. 1. Never go to zero. The hero habit? This is the single most important rule in my life. No matter what happens, do not let a day go to zero. 0 pages read, 0 words written, 0 minutes moving. The potential? It preserves your identity through the chaos. The pain solved? It eliminates the all or nothing mindset. If you can't do a 60-minute workout, do 1 push-up. If you can't write 1,000 words, write 1 sentence. Big idea. 1% is infinitely greater than 0%. A 1 push-up day is still a workout day in your mind's eye. 2. The inverse 2-minute rule. Most people use the 2-minute rule for chores. I use it for expansion. When starting a new habit, you are only allowed to do it for 2 minutes. The potential? It masters the art of showing up. Once you show up, the hard part is over. The pain solved? The starting friction that keeps you on the couch. Metaphor? You're building the on-ramp to the highway. You don't need to drive 100 miles per hour yet. You just need to get on the road. 3. Build an external brain, the screenshot habit. Stop trusting your biological brain to store information. It's meant for processing, not storage. Screenshot every insight, every quote, and every weird 2 a.m. thought. The potential? You create a digital junk drawer that eventually becomes a library of genius. The pain solved? The I know I read this somewhere anxiety. Example: I have built entire businesses and video scripts just by scrolling through a folder of screenshots I took months ago. 4. The 1% weirder strategy. Expansion happens at the edges of the familiar. Don't try to be better. That's subjective and stressful. Try to be 1% weirder. Take a different route to work. Talk to the person in the elevator. The potential? It stretches your comfort zone until uncomfortable becomes your default state. The pain solved? The stagnation of a normal and boring life. Big idea. The opposite of weird isn't normal. It's boring. And boring people don't change the world. 5. Phone face down. 0 leftover attention. When you are in a conversation, your phone goes face down on the table or stays in your pocket. The potential? It signals that the human in front of you is more important than the digital ghosts in your pocket. The pain solved? The erosion of deep human connection. Metaphor? Give people your actual attention, not your leftovers. 6. The 2-breath buffer. Before you react to any external stimulus, a notification, a rude comment, or a stressful email, take 2 deep breaths. The potential? It creates a gap between stimulus and response. In that gap lies your freedom. The pain solved. Impulsive reactions that damage your reputation or your peace of mind. Big idea. You cannot control what happens, but you can always control the 2 seconds following what happens. 7. Water before everything. Before you have your coffee, your soda, or your wine, you must drink 8 to 16 ounces of water. The potential. It forces a moment of mindfulness before consumption and solves 90% of low energy issues. The pain solved. Chronic dehydration masquerading as hunger or fatigue. 8. The and then what? Stress test. When you are about to skip a habit or make a poor choice, ask yourself and then what 3 times. The potential. It forces you to look at second and third order consequences. The pain solved. Short-term gratification that leads to long-term regret. Example, I'll skip the gym. And then what? I'll feel sluggish tomorrow. And then what? I'll be more likely to skip tomorrow too. And then what? My identity as an athlete starts to dissolve. 9. Possibility framing, the what if habit. When something goes wrong, stop asking, why me? And start asking, what if this is exactly what I needed? The potential. It turns every obstacle into a curriculum for your growth. The pain solved. The victim mentality that paralyzes progress. Quote, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Marcus Aurelius 10. The future me vote. Every decision is a vote. Before you act, ask, no, what would the person I want to become choose? The potential. It shifts your perspective from current comfort to future growth. The pain solved. Decision fatigue. You no longer have to decide what to do. You simply act in alignment with your future identity. Remember, your future self is not a result of a one-time heroic effort. It is the result of the quiet, invisible choices you make when nobody is watching. Choose to never go to zero.